On this episode of the Bigwater podcast, we have Jason Albanese. He worked for the Watercraft department for a long time and ended his career as an investigator, has kind of seen all the good, the bad, and the ugly. His stories are sure to curb toenails, make you just cringe, and then also laugh. He's got funny stuff and then bad stuff this week on the Bigwater podcast. Producer, here we are with another podcast. At this point in the game, do you like the podcast?
You ask me this every
because I feel like
the intro. If our guests are listening, they're probably just going, "Why does he ask this question every single podcast?"
Because I'm like your wife. I'm just going to ask you until I get the answer I want.
Are you that worried I dislike you and dislike the podcast?
Well, sometimes I feel like you're just wandering. I could give a shit less if you do or you don't, but. I think we have one you're going to like today because you like to poke fun at him more than 12 years ago. 12, 13, 14 years ago, you poked fun at him when we were doing our TV show. And I think that one of the first things we have to bring up is him falling down on camera down basically a hillside, I think would be accurate.
Yeah, it was a hillside going down to an inland lake and
ice fishing.
Yeah, ice fishing.
Yeah. So you do remember. So that'll be fun. But we're bringing on Jason Albanese, and he was a watercraft guy for 20 some years. And we're going to talk about some funny stuff, some bad stuff, and just some stories that he's kind of doesn't hold his tongue. So it's going to be interesting. These guys have seen a lot. They're basically a water cop. They may not like that term, but and you get to see a lot of stuff, right? Like it's like Walmart on steroids here. So
yeah, it'll make you. It will make you think twice when you go out on the water, right? Before you go to take some precautions because he has seen it all.
And that's really well said because I think that when I talked with him about this and he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, tell some crazy stories that are going to make people go, what? But at the same point, there's a little education there just to realize like, hey, things can go bad really quick. Like boats don't have brakes. They do catch on fire. There's a lot of stuff going on that I don't think people think about when they just head out to, maybe go partying or, pleasure deal with the family or whatever it may be, or even fishing, of course. So let's bring Jason on and I'm ready to hear some more crazy stories because we've had guys we've asked for stories before and they kind of let us down. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay, well, I don't think Jason's going to, so let's bring him in. Jason Albanese, welcome to the Bigwater podcast. We've been talking about and planning this for a very long time. We kind of waited, for you to be a retired old fart, right?
That's right. Now it's been a year and a half, so
now he can talk, right? Is that the being retired? Now he can talk.
Well, I mean. The elephant in the room, real talk is, and this is no different. And obviously, Jason worked through the government deal, right? I mean, there's no surprise there. And I totally understood where you're coming from, and rather some of it was, just you being safe or whatever. But I mean, producer dude, like seriously, like any job you're at, like, are you going to start talking about, potentially your boss or other people while you got to show up on Monday morning and be like, hey,
right.
But I mean, we're going to dig into some stories and some good stuff here, and we want to make sure that we didn't, put anything out there. We're not going to name names and stuff like that. But I'm really entertained because I mean, as we talked a little bit, some of the different things that you've come across. And how many years as a watercraft guy?
24.
24. That's a long time to do anything. But before we go there, producer dude, do you remember one of your first meetings well over a decade ago now with Jason?
Yes, I remember him falling up a hill.
So yeah. Jason, I just want to let you know, producer dude was the producer. That's how we kind of started this whole thing of a TV show that we did for almost a decade. And there was like this unwritten rule that he somehow came up with that like, hey, everybody gets a hard time on the show as long as the name's Ross type of thing. But then he made exceptions for a couple people. Okay, Tom Vadalero, who's been on the Bigwater podcast, and you, because he's like, he just seems like he can take it. And do you remember, producer dudes, what you said as he started to walk up that hill? So little backgrounds were ice fishing on this really small lake, and there was a really steep incline to get down to the lake.
Right. And I told our camera guy, I'm like, make sure you roll as they're going up these hills because someone's gonna fall. And sure enough, he was going up the hill, bam, fell, slid right back down.
Well, it wasn't just you fell down on slippery ice. Let's put this in perspective here, because I just as many days as I've been on the ice or the water, I mean, remembering this is awesome. You were in Carhartt, so it looked like a deer was rolling down a hill because you rolled down. This was a really steep incline full of ice and snow. But do you remember this, Jason?
I do. The only thing I remember was that all I had to do was cuss like a sailor so that they wouldn't play it on anything.
I think we might have used it during the credits. Maybe. We
used it somewhere, yeah. Yeah, see, you don't get by our deal like that. Like, we'll either bleep or take audio off and then play some, like, fairy music of, like, da 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 da, some ballerina stuff. Do we have any ballerina music we could maybe lay over this right now, producer?
Yeah, I hear you.
But I do remember you falling as well, Ross, right? Right,
yeah.
Jason?
Yeah, that was a different shoot, but it was another show with Jason. That was when we were going out, we were exploring, and do you remember this? Where the ice was so thin and we were checking it, that we hit one little area and I fell in it was like a wave, like everybody felt it move. Do you remember that?
I do, because you were the last one on the ice because we all ran and jumped on shore real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I was exploring. We were doing our checking and then we got to a bad check area. How about that? And we left there quickly and then we went over and fished another little pond not too far away. I remember that. But yeah, that just goes to show you ice, you can be 4 inches thick on one lake and one on another, even though they're only a few minutes away. But at any rate, here's what we're going to do. People love stories. And I think that, nobody wants to hear you can appreciate this. Like, nobody wants to hear, hey, wear your life jacket, bro. Right. Like, we all know we should, I mean, even me now, I'm kind of glad they've changed that law with the kill switch thing, because I'm going to be first one to tell you 15 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, I didn't wear my kill switch all the time. I'm not going to lie to you. Horrible decision. So now that is like, hey, this is a law. It's a good one and it forces you to do it. But nobody wants to talk about that stuff. It's not fun. So a lot of the things that are fun are stories. And I know me and you just talking through the years. And that's why when you agreed to open to Pandora's box, just let the unicorns out here. There's a lot of different things that are, I mean, anything from seeing people maybe getting busy in the boat. Okay. To let's say, fatalities because of, poor decisions or other people maybe intoxicated or whatever. So start off with maybe one of your favorite situations. I shouldn't say favorites, but notable, because some of these, maybe they're not necessarily fun, but they're kind of like, whoa, really?
Yeah. With my job a little bit, I always said that for me to wish for overtime, everybody always wants to work overtime, get more money and stuff. But for me to wish for overtime, it was tough because that meant that something bad was happening to somebody. So I just couldn't wish for that. But in our investigator realm, we had several accidents that would fall under the realm of, you don't get to do these very often. And because of my location in the Bass Islands and stuff, I had several accidents, and they're not really accidents. They're different things that you work that are hard to work, which is electroshock drowning and carbon monoxide poisoning. Ooh. And I had a couple of them.
Yeah, people don't realize a lot of people get electrocuted in marinas because of bad grounds.
Yes.
At the different, whether it's dock lights and, things get, ice damage or drug around from being in and out. And that's why they always tell you, don't swim in a marina.
Right. Because one, the grounding's bad, but two, you don't know what boats are actually putting the current in the water. And this particular case happened out at Put in Bay, and it was the boat got plugged into the wrong receptacle. On boats, there's either 220 or 120 or 240, and this boat needed to be in the 120, but it fit into the 240. Now, most people will say, well, you can't do that because they're just RV fittings, but if you force it, it'll eventually go. And the story on this was there was a dad, 2 kids, and a wife on a boat with a dog. They pulled up. Dad plugged the receptacle in, went down below, checked the boat to see if it had power. It was funny. So he went back up, told his wife to watch it while he corrected it. On his way up, he looked, dog was in the water. Dog was struggling. So he said, hey, I'm going to run in and get the dog. So he jumps in to get the dog, not knowing that there's current in the water. He then started getting...
And you mean electrical current, not current.
Yeah. Sorry, electrical current. While he's in the water, he's locked up. He can't talk. He can't swim. He's just barely keeping his head up. Both his sons, adult son in college, and then like around a 14, 15-year-old son, they both jump in then to help dad. Now you got 3 people being electrocuted and the dog. The wife comes up, and the dad has now gotten far enough away from it that it's dissipated a little bit, and he mustered out electricity. She leaned over, grabbed the power cord from the boat, unplugged it. Witnesses by said there was a huge spark went by, and then that took the current out of the water. When the dad went to swim in, and the one son, the younger son, grabbed the dog. Dad looked over at his older son, and he was convulsing in the water, which he ended up later on dying.
Not good. So, and that's not a one-off deal. That happens all the time in some way, shape, or form like that.
Yep, in a lot of marinas it happens, and that's why a lot of people will see signs to say no swimming in the marina, and people want to let their kids swim from their boat, but that's why you get that is because of electrical current in the water.
Is there any obvious things that boaters can do that are kind of like, like the wearing your kill switch type thing? Is there anything super simple that these guys can do, or is it some of these are just bad situations?
Some are bad situations, but you can get things like for that one there, you could they make these bobbers that you would put around your boat and just tie on, just leave them in there when you're at a marina, if you're going to be there for a week or a couple days. And then they float in the water, and if they light up, like you can see them glowing, that means there's current in the water. So definitely stay out of the water, and even report that to get that taken care of.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. That seems like kind of a simple deal.
Yeah.
If you're a boater, you know what I mean? I can see for myself, like that's probably not something I'm going to do because I don't do that stuff enough. But if you're a guy that goes and hangs out at Put in Bay every weekend or travels in your boat or whatever, that'd be good. But I think the ones that I bet you have to have a bunch of stories on, because are you familiar with Qualified Captain? It's like on Instagram and Facebook and stuff.
No, I've never seen that.
You should look at it. These guys started putting these videos up where people just don't know how to run their boat. And eventually people just started sending them. Now it's like this multi-million-dollar business, and they're selling merch and everything else. And the videos that they always put up there just nonstop. And a lot of their stuff isn't, ultimately a fatality. It's more of like, hey, this is what it looks like just before something bad happens, right? Hence the Qualified Captain kind of is a spoof. But the one that's just always is the people riding on the bow of the boats, man. These people going through some nasty stuff, and they got their kids and stuff sitting right up on the front, and you're like, what are you doing? Putting the boat on plane, pontoon boats. And I mean, you already know the end result of that. Or people I don't think they understand the severity. Like, they don't look at boats as being as dangerous as a car. And in some aspects, it's way worse because you got the drowning as well as the impact situation.
Right. And we had several of those. And I actually had 2 back-to-back accidents, and pontoon boats are the worst because there is a little platform up there, and a lot of people let their kids go up there. They hang their feet off. But the first one was a wife and husband. They hit a wake. The husband fell in the water, and the wife was on plane. She was able to shut it off, but still the prop going through the water chewed up his back really bad, and he was hurt pretty bad. But then another one, guy had his kids up there on the front of that boat, and he was going along the water, and the kids were messing around pushing each other, and they both fell in the water. They were cousins. The one cousin fell to the outside. The guy's son fell right in the middle, and he was on plane, and he ran him over and cut his leg off, unfortunately. But bad accidents happen. And when we stopped people and would talk to them, they were just clueless about that stuff. And we try to educate them, but sometimes you just have to be in that situation to even understand what's going to happen.
I don't think people take it serious. Like I said, it's just their fun time. And I really don't think that they think about it. I mean, I see it every day, obviously, and obviously you throw in the alcohol into there. I mean, that's got to be, what portion of these incidents that you had do you think alcohol were a key factor in?
Oh, I'd say between 60 to 75%, you get alcohol involved. We're getting a lot more sober skippers, but then when the accidents happen, usually somebody's pretty trashed, pretty drunk in those situations, and then you just handle the situation accordingly. But
Yeah. Living so close to Put-in-Bay, I mean, I can remember, and I don't know if these are facts, but I remember one of the Coast Guard's guy told me before that Marblehead was one of the most trafficked or runs or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
You know, as far as most responses, and most of them were like gas or somebody drunk, you know, like getting somebody that ran out of gas, and alcohol was always a play because it's kind of party island. People that are listening to this that don't know, Put-in-Bay is basically an island of 4 miles or so offshore, and it's got 40 bars on it or what have you. And it's kind of it's like Key West North, they call it.
Right. Everybody takes their boat out there, docks it, goes up, drinks a bunch, and then drives wherever, and bad things happen usually then.
Yeah. Any other any alcohol things that kind of stick out that were, you know, mainly alcohol induced?
Well, some of the obvious stuff, you know, like, so Toledo's the big city close that I cover. It's not like a Cleveland, but it's a pretty big city, and the river runs right through downtown, and they have the fireworks right on the river. And I always said you could almost walk across the river when the fireworks are there because there's so many boats. And the one end where the one bridge is usually starts the no wake zone. So people get outside of that, they can go on plane. Well, it's just covered with boats in there. And there was a guy cruising along, and all of a sudden he went to go up on plane and try and dodge all these boats. And everybody was screaming and yelling. We went over and stopped the guy and pulled him aside. And he was just, he was hammered. He couldn't even hardly stand up. And he's like, this is the no wake zone. And I was like, well, look around. And then the other one, and you don't realize how drunk people get, but on your boat, you're supposed to have a distress flag, the orange flag with the black and square and circle. Well, we were out in Defiance, and I stopped a guy out there during the fireworks and for some stuff. And I'm going through the safety inspection, and hey, you got a distress flag. And he picked up this American flag like 3 or 4 times, and he'd look at it and he'd set it down. Well, like the 4th time he picked it up, he looked at it and goes, here it is. Here's my distress flag. And you know, that's how drunk he was. He couldn't even decipher the American flag from the distress flag. So,
well, you know, backing up a little bit, I guess, give me a little education maybe. So, because I think I know the deal on this, but obviously you're the guy who would know. So when you're in an area like that, let's say it is technically, quote, allowed to be wake, right? Like you're on the other side of the bridge, we could run wide open in said area and area X.
Correct.
But you have 900 boats there, literally, because they're doing fireworks. So just the scenario you said. So here's because fishing down south, I know when you're around oil rigs and different things, what people don't realize is, yes, you can run on plane there. However, you are responsible for your wake.
Correct.
So even if you can run wide open there, if there's 900 boats there, you can't just run through them, dude. Right. Because it's wide open because there's a bunch of boats there because you're responsible for the wake behind you.
Right. Yeah. It's the same thing when you get out on Lake Erie and you're fishing and there's big fleets of what I call perch fishermen and around. And then we get big go fast boats. We were getting complaints on it. One guy was doing it all the time, and they go right through the middle of them and just wake them all out and think it's funny. Well, we sat out there and waited for him, and we ended up catching that guy that was doing that. And we ended up writing him a ticket. But same thing. You just, if there's,
did it change anything? Did it change anything?
Did it? Probably not. Probably not.
I mean, was it a $200 fine for the guy in the small wiener boat?
Yeah. It probably didn't change anything, but yeah, what do you do?
So what happens? Let's say you give him, is this like regular enforcement, like with speeding and stuff? So let's say you give this guy 3 of these same exact violations. He pays his $200. Can you escalate that to basically say, hey, you know, or is it just the same every time?
No, you can escalate it to where you can actually cite them into court and they go in for the judge, but it's still a misdemeanor citation. And they're not going to get much out of that.
I almost didn't want to ask that question because I figured that it was going to be a disappointing thing. I mean, that's where, you know, back in the day when we were younger boys, and we were probably even on the tail end of this before cell phone cameras, when somebody just used to get a beat down when they went to wherever they went at the end, and then maybe that was the reason, like 20 dudes perch fish just start slapping their shit out of you.
Right. Yeah. So, taking care of business.
Maybe we need to get to that a little bit. But so back to the Maumee River, like as a kid that grew up in Toledo and fished the Maumee River just a ton when, you know, wasn't even old enough to drive. I saw some crazy shit there, like crazy. And I saw people float boats in there in a crazy current, and they're almost always John boats, because for people that haven't been there, it's damn near, I would say, knee to waist deep a majority of the areas that you're going to be fishing. Yes, there are some deeper holes or whatever, but these guys would come in there with, John boats, no flotation, no life jackets on, and the current is ripping in there. You had to have had just a ton of stuff, because I've witnessed multiple things there in the big picture, relatively small amount of time I was on the water.
Yeah, and we always, I can remember we'd be out patrolling and you look at that and you go, look at that boat. It's like they shouldn't even be out here, because some of the boats that go through there are pretty big and cause a pretty big wake. But one of them, there was two guys paddling, and they have a little dog on there, and they have 2 electric trolling motors hooked up in the back with batteries and a bunch of fishing stuff. They're anchored fishing. They were severely overloaded, and they're right out there where the big boats. It's Grassy Island right there at the mouth. And they're right there at the mouth fishing, and we stop them, and we're like, and the waves are just rocking and rolling on them. And, I think they had life jackets on the boat. They weren't wearing them, but they had them on the boat. But we were just like, hey, man, this is a little unsafe. You got to go in and stay in into an area where you're not going to be bothered by these other bigger boats. Because if we deem that we would deem that there's a situation that's bad, we could actually stop the situation and send them in if we wanted to. That one I didn't do that very often, and that was one of the ones that we did and pushed them in so that we wouldn't be coming out there for a bad situation.
Can you stereo? I mean, I know you can. I'm wondering if you're going to, like, when you come up to a cop, like people say, oh, you're profiling or whatever. Is there a type of boater, or maybe a type of boat? Like I call them small wiener boats. Okay. We also have, I know you fit into one of these categories, bass holes, like bass boat guys that go out there 900 miles an hour. Like, just get on top of them, Bob. We'll be fine. Or, the big boat guys, it's like, of course, I always think we're right. I'm a small trailer boat guy, deep V hull, whatever. But then you get we call them the big white boats. Like in chartering, there's the big white boats and there's the sparkly boats, as they call them. And we both hate each other because they seem to fight each other nonstop. From a enforcement standpoint or issues or whatever you want to call it, was there a certain group or somebody you're just like, ugh, or somebody you just knew you're going to pull into and like they're going to have a violation or not having something really good?
I wouldn't say there was a group. I didn't look at it like that. I always tried to keep an open mind when I would stop people and stuff. Now, we did get attitude from a lot of people, especially the bigger boats. Those guys would always think that they're better than everybody. And, what are you stopping me for, kind of thing. Most of the bass fishermen guys, I would always relate with them just because I would say, oh, I have one of these at home too, but you can't do this kind of thing. But I wouldn't say, obviously you can't stereotype when you're out there doing stuff, but
good police work, though. Good police work.
Yeah.
See, this is why we wait till you're retired, because now we can talk about real talk. Like, I mean, there's things that there's, like they say, what's the difference between profiling and doing good police work? Number of years and verbiage or something, right? Like,
it is learning how to talk to people.
Interesting. So, give me another one that kind of stands out, because I mean, in 20 some years of doing this, like, I mean, how many incidents do you think on average, or do you even know the number, like that you would average per year that you would have to investigate or deal with?
Well, so I was an officer and a sergeant for 10 years. And then I was an investigator for my last 13 years. And the majority of those last 13 years, when I did mainly boat incidents and investigations, I would have on the average about 75 boat accidents a year that I would investigate.
No shit.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's just, I mean, what region of Lake Erie is that the 75 fall into? Because there was more than one of you, right?
No, I was the only one. Oh, and
okay. Well, maybe
in my area. Everywhere else, there's 2, but in my area, I was the only one. And
that's what I meant. What are the areas like?
Oh, so my area was Huron West. And I had the inland stuff, all the rivers, when you get out into the local counties, private ponds too. A lot of people don't understand private ponds we have authority on if there's major incidents, fatals, somebody's hurt real bad, something along that lines. We can't just go patrol a private pond, but Lake Erie, yeah, that's so from there over was my area, and that was 70, and that's the ones we knew about. We knew there wasn't a lot of accidents that didn't get reported, especially when it's just property damage. Somebody runs into a dock or but if they run into another boat, usually that gets reported because most insurance companies need a report on that.
Yeah, that's what I didn't realize either. And I think that's you. If somebody has, like, let's say a bunch of fiberglass damage from tearing something up, don't they have to go to you to get a report?
Yeah, actually, anything over 500.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, anything over $500 had to be reported. Now I think we've changed that now since I've been retired. I think it's up to 2,000, could be 1,500, but it's up there now. But still, you look at your cell phone. Technically, something happens and your cell phone gets dropped in the water. What are those things now? $1,200 a pop. So you're almost at the threshold right there, just with that.
You know, one thing that I think they're always, as a guy that does this for a living, I think I know the rules better than most, but I think there's still a lot of gray areas. And then the reality is, it's just like, okay, you know, the guy in the right has the right of way. But when nobody follows that, or nobody pays attention, or 9 out of 10 boaters out there don't know, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or just don't seem to give a shit, seems to be a lot of it. And that's really the problem with a lot of it. But how many incidents do you have, or things that come to note of, like, with a ferry, for example? Have you ever had anything? Because I see guys and they're like, well, I'm on the right side. And it's like, dude, it's a ferry. He's under work. So explain a few of those things, or if you have any incidents with, like, a boat, quote, working.
Yeah. So if it's a boat working and it's in a channel, it has to actually, they have to stay in that channel. So they have the right of way. Now, if they're out on the middle of the lake, there are some rules that apply, but you still got to get out of the way. We did have a ferry over in Cleveland that ran over a fishing boat, and it ended up killing a guy out of that. It was a small little fishing boat. They were anchored. They said they saw it coming. They just didn't move. They just sat there. The ferry boat was driving right into the sun. He couldn't see this small little boat and ran him over. Unfortunate situation, but that does happen, and you just got to kind of get out of their way if you can. They're not as maneuverable as most other boats. So
don't be dead right. Well, what about, like, people, again, that are maybe close to us or have been around here, like the Kelly's Island ferry, or like the Miller to South Bass Island and Middle Bass Island? Like, those guys have a lane, and if I was to look at their GPS track, they're within 10 feet unless it's a weather situation. They're just back and forth, you know, every half an hour. So they have the right of way?
Yes, right away. And if you look at a nautical map, it'll have on there the track that shows their ferry lane that you have to give way to them. So they take off and they go, and they won't slow down for hardly anything. You know, they'll, you know, just keep going, and you got to get out of their way. They'll veer if they're going to run into you, but, you know, usually they'll be hitting their horn long before they run into you, and you can't.
Yeah. I mean, dude, those guys, especially in a weekend, man, they just, some of these boaters around them guys, it's just like, are you kidding? Well, I got a fish on. Like, dude, you're a dipshit. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Aside from, what do they say? What's that old saying? Don't be dead right. I mean, yeah, like the guy that anchored up. Well, I got a good perch on, Bob. We don't want to pull the hook just quite yet.
Right.
Oh, not good. So, you know, obviously we've had a bunch of serious ones in there, but I mean, there's always some funny stuff, because I can remember as a kid, like pretty young, a guy's planer board, like, literally hits our boat. He just keeps coming. We're trying to turn, right? And when his board literally hits us, because we did damn near a spin, we're like, there's nobody in the boat. Well, let's just say a head popped up. Okay. And then we found out why, you know, the boat wasn't being driven, and somebody was having a good time. Have you ever had some risque stuff, as they say?
You know, I've always had a couple when I was patrolling myself, and, you know, you say, hey, can I just see a couple life jackets? And then, of course, especially if it's a boatload of girls, they'll all, like, flash you and say, you know, oh, do these work? You know, and you got to be like, well, thank you, but, you know, no, it's got to be life jacket. You got to stay professional when you're out there. And then, but one of the ones that my guys had, it was on the Sandusky Bay. They were out patrolling, and they're driving along, and they look over and they see a boat that's just going all over the place. It's under power. The boat's running, and it's just under power, but nobody's behind the wheel. So they think something happened to the guy, or he fell out, or something along that lines. Well, as they get closer to it, they see a guy's white butt up in the air. And then they're like, what the heck? And all of a sudden they get right on top of them, because they were going over there in a hurry, and they were having a little threesome, 2 guys and a girl on the boat. So,
wow, that's a party.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Producer dude, do you feel like you're living a dull life now after listening to some of these?
Yeah, but that would be hard to do on a jet ski.
Yeah, that's I don't want to think of this.
Yeah.
Jet skis. There has to be some producer dude is a jet ski. Like he'll go from Michigan to Put-in Bay. I mean, crazy. He's a jet skier. Like that's his thing.
We friends had one sink between middle sister and west sister, just about sunk. We had to tow it all the way back, which full of water. It took 5 hours. So we've had our share of mishaps on the jet skis.
There's a lot with jet skis, and some of them are, there was an explosion. A lady was sitting on top of it. They'd run it. She'd run it for like an hour with her kid on board. Got him off. She was idling out, and it just exploded and threw her up in the air. She came down, broke both her ankles on the side of the jet ski. There's all sorts of jet ski accidents. Although I use jet skis as when I was teaching boating classes, I'd say, how many of these jet ski accidents do you think are fatal boat accidents? And all people be like, oh, almost all of them. And I'm like, well, not really, because jet skiers, they're forced to wear a life jacket when they're underway. And I'm not saying they're not maimed or crippled, but they're still alive because we can get to them. And, that's my disclaimer for wearing a life jacket. But one of the ones I remember, it was a lady. She was coming back from her and her kids. Now, she was by herself on a jet ski, and her two kids both had I think it was their kids' girlfriends. It could have been one of them, their wives or whatever. But they're coming back, and they're coming back from Put-in Bay going down to the Portage River. And somehow she got launched off of her jet ski. And she watches it go. It's real windy. She can't catch up to it. She's a little bit older, and it's going away from her. Now, she has her life jacket on, and it's snugged up right. And the kids come back, and they can't find her. They were like, well, she was just back here. We couldn't find her. So as I'm talking to them doing the investigation, they can't find her. Well, this goes through the night, and in the morning, and I know as an investigator, the longer this goes, normally it's not going to turn out very good. So I'm over. They actually own the campground, so I'm there with them. They got good support. We're talking. The Coast Guard's out searching. Our guys are out searching. They ended up finding the jet ski once it got daylight. So that was kind of hope a little bit. It wasn't sunk or anything. It was just floating around. Now, overnight, there was a huge storm that came through. Big wind, big 6-foot waves. So in the morning, one of my guys calls me and says, hey, have you heard anything from the Coast Guard? And I said, no. And he said, well, we found her. And the way he said it, I didn't think it was going to be in a positive manner. And I'm like, how is she? And he goes, she's alive. And I was like, okay. So I had to go over and tell the family, hey, your mom's alive. They were in distraught, ended up going to the hospital. Well, when I was talking to her, what happened was she fell off. The wind blew it away. She couldn't catch it. She could see her kids. They were probably 150 yards away from her, but they just couldn't see her because the wind was starting to pick up a little bit. Well, I mean, the waves were big, and she went so if she's going back, if you can imagine, she was going straight down to Catawba to try and get out of the wind, and then she was going to hug the shore because it was a strong south wind. She was going to hug the shore around over to the Portage River. Well,
smart.
Yeah. I mean, she was smart. She's very knowledgeable on boats and stuff. But she said that the current took her. It was so funky. It took her down across, and she remembers looking up at Davis Bessie at the tower. So it took her all the way over there. Then it caught a different current and took her back down by the portage and around. She said at one point, she goes, overnight during the storm, I almost got ran over by the Coast Guard boat. And I said, well, how do you know it was the Coast Guard boat? She goes, I could read U.S. Coast Guard as they went by me. And I was like, it was close. She goes, yeah, their wash hit me. So I was like, wow.
So, somebody on the Coast Guard needs to open their eyes up.
Well, yeah, I had a little chat with the chief over there. This is going back, probably almost 10 years ago, though, when this happened. So it was a couple of chiefs ago. But when how she was found was, of course, the next morning, a lot of people went out to look, and some good friends of theirs happened to be going out. And the lady in the back said, I'm just going to stare at one spot. I'm not going to look around, which was smart of her. And as she's going, the lady then in the water said that she could see them. So she said, I'm going to give it one last hurrah. She kicked as hard as she could and waved her hands. And that's what the other lady in the boat found her, and they saw her and went and picked her up. So She was exhausted to the point where she was about ready to drown. But all night in that big storm, then it laid down flat.
So let's start talking about current. Like people, this is a Great Lakes thing on Erie. I don't know if you'd say it's worse or better, but I'm thinking specifically, and I don't know this because we didn't talk about any of this, but like the beach down in Huron, I know people drown there all the time. And when I say all the time, like not on a not regular basis. I mean, I can remember hearing one story, and maybe you were involved in this one, where a girl went under, nobody could find her. Two young guys, I don't want to say adolescents, but under 18 went in to, quote, be the hero and save her. And both of those guys drowned, and the girl popped back up. That was a while ago, but not that long ago. But that beach in particular, the current that are down there, I don't think people understand. And in certain areas like that off that Huron, I think they call it the Nickel Plate Beach or something like that. But give me some stuff on the current, or maybe even that beach specifically, that seems to just have so many issues.
Well, there's always current on Lake Erie. If you've ever been up, which I'm sure you have, the Detroit River, there's some pretty good current flowing through there. And then it hits Lake Erie, it opens up, but there's always a current going through Lake Erie, just a natural current, because it's flowing from one end to the other to flow out. And then when you get storms or waves, or even over there on the Huron River, it comes out, and then so the current's coming out of the river, it gets all stirred up right there, and then you get undertows if there's waves coming in, and that's what grabs people and pulls them under. Is just from that. Yeah, that's a bad beach. We had several there, and since it's non-boating, we'll go down and help with the search and stuff. But usually it's the fire department or the Huron or the sheriff's department. They usually do the investigation on those.
I just looked up a quick number. Every 2.6 years, Lake Erie completely turns over with water. That's how much is flowing out of there.
Yep.
Like every drop, every 2.6 years is cycled through.
Yep, that's a lot of water. It's big.
Yeah, because that same number is like 40 or 50 years or something crazy on Lake Superior, or maybe more. I can't remember, but I know it was a lot.
Right.
So, yeah, that current thing, I mean, I think about probably, I'm going to guess in your time, one of the biggest rescue attempts or whatever you want to call it, incidents. But I can remember being out there and people actually thought it was me because of the description at the time. Younger guy, all black boat. And there was a fatality, and it was literally happened on the same reef, which is the crazy thing that I was fishing. And I remember talking to you later because I'm like, I was literally right there. And, again, I'll let you kick in real quick, but it's like the next day out, I don't know how to describe this, but it looked like World War III. There was planes from Canada. I mean, there was charter boats that were, 20 wide. I never had seen such a search mission. I mean, they had that ground where it looked like a big ice cream cone hanging below planes, and they just were going back and forth. These big, giant, old, like World War II kind of bomber style planes, and at least to my eye. Tell me a little bit about that one, because that had to be more man hours and manpower than anything that I've ever seen.
Right. You're talking the Quadruple fatal.
Yes.
So, those are always tough because when you have to deal with kids, because there was a juvenile involved in that one. So we get the report. It's early in the morning, like 3-4 o'clock in the morning. We got the report that they hadn't made it in yet. There hasn't been any contact with them. So I go up on scene, I get there, and, we're, right there at the Toussaint and they put in right there beside it. That was our kind of headquarters. A lot of people were staged up there. A lot of their friends were there, and we're talking to everybody. And then they ended up finding the boat. It was upside down. It was straight up and down in the water. So obviously it had capsized. So, I'd give updates to the people and tell them that we found the boat straight up and down, which I figured that usually happens when it gets daylight. Once it gets daylight, you can see a lot better, so you can find things like that. But when I started looking we left the boat there because that was a good reference point for kind of where it was close to have happened. And they started searching. They put divers in the water. There was nothing around there. So we pulled the boat. I secured it, locked it up, was going to look at it later that day. We ended up finding the two females, which one of them was a juvenile. right away. They ended up having float coats on, but the water temp was it was in the low 40s, I believe, if I remember.
It was brutal. Yeah, I remember that day like it was yesterday. How long ago was that?
Man, that was like
10, 15?
12 years, 2012, I think, something along
That's probably pretty close. It was a crazy east wind, and it was the temperature. It just felt like it was, even though the temperature wasn't below freezing, it felt freezing cold with that, and because the water was maybe in the 40s.
Right. And it was, so we brought both girls in. So we knew who was on the boat. So we had the parents there. So we ended up telling both them, but the coroner needed a positive ID on them. And that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was I took one family and the sheriff took the other family, Lavorchek there from Ottawa County. And we had to go in and, be with the family while they did the positive ID. And that was rough. That was, tearjerker right there. That was pretty hard. So we got that done. We had the two males were still missing that were on the boat. I took the boat after we pulled it out, got it in storage. I went then and finally looked at it. There was a GPS on board. There was he had a partner that was involved in their fishing and stuff. And he said that he usually ran like a GoPro, but that GoPro wasn't on the boat. I had him come over and look at the boat to tell me if there's any new damage, anything missing. And that's when he told me about the GoPro. But, when I pulled the GPS, the only thing that it showed was that they were coming. You could see where they were trolling, obviously. And then there was a straight line. They were coming in, and it took a hard left. And then I think it went like 25 feet. And then that was it. That was the last thing that was on the GPS. So I'm going to imagine whatever happened right there.
And didn't you guys have to send that GPS back to like get the hard drive or something out of it, or?
So we tried the ports on it because of the water. You just never know what water's going to do with that stuff. I mean, I did everything you could do. I soaked the whole thing in rice. I, did a whole bunch of stuff. It didn't work. I could read it. I could look at it. I just couldn't download anything off of it. So I took pictures of everything I could on that boat, or on the GPS itself when it was powered. I even had the local rep come and, he sat down with me and we did it just so I didn't screw anything up. But, the only thing I had was that's what it was doing. We ended up, I had the speed, which I can't remember right away what exactly it was, but they were going pretty fast, for a walleye boat. Those guys are crazy anyways. But so the other two, we ended up finding them a couple weeks later. So they were all four. That's how we determined there was 4 fatals involved. And then because in the law enforcement realm, you can't assume anything, I guess I could have my suspicion on what I think might have happened, but I can't sit there and say, this is what happened. This is an official document and put it on my accident report because I just don't know. I got to have evidence to back that stuff up. But
the assumption is they hit something, maybe
they either hit something, they were going fast. They caught a chine on their boat, and it turned them abruptly and threw them out and rolled them over. Or they hit something. There was, it was winter. There's a lot of trees and logs and stuff out there. They could have hit something like that. You just never know. But so once it was all completed and I sent it out, the Toledo Blade actually got a hold of the accident. They did a public records request like they're supposed to and did it. And then they posted it online. And then actually during the whole incident too, I was receiving phone calls from people that said they know what happened. And I'm like, oh, cool, we have a witness. And then the guy was like, well, here's my theory. And, okay, whatever. You got
to get a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people. And then even online, once the Toledo Blade posted that online, there was a lot of people going on there that, and said, oh, you don't know what you're doing. This is what happened or that's what happened. And I was like, no, these people just don't know. So, but that was a tough one. That was, when you have 4 people die like that, that's pretty tough.
Again, kind of backing up to the current situation, the 2 females had a life jacket found quickly.
Yes.
The 2 guys because of the water temperature, people that maybe don't know this, when it's that cold, they don't, I think gas out is the technical term. So basically they don't float up, and they may be suspended or, somewhere in the water column, not on the surface. And didn't they find those two bodies? I was just having this conversation with somebody a few days ago, 40, 50 miles apart or something crazy.
Oh yeah. The one, he drifted, the first one that came up, he drifted straight in because it was a north wind for a while, and he drifted straight in. So we found him on the beach. But the other one, yeah, he was quite a ways away. Actually, he was on the other side of the islands out in that realm out there. So he was quite a ways away from where the other one was found. But yeah, because of current, because they'll slowly start to come off the bottom. And once bodies are heavy in the water, once they start to come up, the current will start to push them around a little bit before they're even up on top of the water. So it can make it tough.
Ooh. Do you have another fun one? After that, I feel like, that's like, I think we need a fun one.
I'm going to look at my notes real quick, only because you start thinking, don't realize.
Dealing with drunk people, there has to be some stuff where you're like, I still got to do my job. But if I was standing there next to you, I would think it was hilarious. Girl showing her, woo-hoo is, that's funny. But you have to have some, what do they call those? Liquid encouraged lawyers, I think is the term, where all of a sudden they start telling you the law, they know everything, and listen here.
Well, and there's always people that, think, well, I'll wait and I won't tell them I'm driving just yet. So we had one guy ran into a break wall. We go in and question him.
More than you think.
Huh?
Happens more than you think.
A lot more than what people think. Totaled the boat. It hit the break wall, and they ended up tying it right how it hit, which was perfect for me. But it hit the break wall. They all get off. The boat owner was sitting there, and he had to be transported to the hospital. He had some pretty good injuries. And when we get to the hospital, they're talking to him and doing their thing in the hospital. So I'm talking to him about what happened. He said, well, there was a girl driving. She was sitting on my lap. She was the one driving. I wasn't driving because he's hammered. And we go back and forth and, all right, fine. So me and another guy are like, there's no way he wouldn't let this girl drive this boat, but he didn't know her name. Nobody on board knew her name. I think actually we knew the first name. So I still do kind of have a side paint business, and I'm actually painting a house. And it's a brand new construction house. So there's people working inside and there's people working outside. And the guy helping me, we had talked a little bit about it. And I said, yeah, we can't find this girl. He comes over to me about a half an hour later and says, hey, I think that girl you're looking for is inside. And I'm like, what?
No way.
Yeah. I'm like, what? So I go inside and I'm like, hey, how you guys doing? I'm talking to him. And then I ID myself to the girl. And I said, were you involved in that accident? And she said, yes. So I called another guy that was actually handling, because I was just an officer at the time. And so he came down and we talked to her a little bit. And it was rehearsed. She later on admitted that it was rehearsed, that she was supposed to say she was driving. And we were like, all right. And he's like, all right, I guess we'll just file all these charges against you. Because, if they can lie, we can lie a little bit too. And
whoa, officer.
You can't.
I'm seeing how this is going down.
Yeah. You can kind of get her to admit. So we said, we'll file all these charges against you. And she said, well, all right, technically I wasn't driving. They just wanted me to say that. And we went on and on. All right, fine. So we went back. First thing we did was went to the hospital and asked for the blood, did a search warrant, got the blood from the guy, and then went and talked to him. And he's like, no, she was driving. And so we had her statement. We ended up testing the blood. It was way over. So we were able to cite him for DUI on that. But, it's a lot of people try and do that. They try and get away with stuff and try and say they weren't driving, especially in accidents. And boats, it's a lot harder than cars because, as you're just sitting there, you can just swap real quick. In a car, it's a little bit harder to swap drivers. So.
Well, and I think too, you tell me when this happened, but it's in my quote adult lifetime, I believe. They changed the law where, you tell me the name, 15, 20 years ago, if you got a DUI or whatever you want to call it in a boat, you got a DUI on a boat. Now that goes on your driver's license.
And Now, some states, absolutely. Indiana is one of them. Ohio is really pushing for that. I don't think some judges do it. Some judges just do it anyways. But get a good attorney and they can usually take care of that. But other judges, it doesn't have anything to do with your driving license. So it's tough, when you get into that, when you start going to court and you start dealing with the judges and, what's going on with, who gets arrested and who doesn't. It can be an issue.
There's been like, I can think of a couple charter captains, nobody I associate with, but that have like 3 or 4 DUIs, they lose their captain's license, and you're like, and maybe that, at that point, some of those guys is why the judge said you can't drive either, sir.
Yeah. And that's sometimes the judges just pull it out. They can see that what's going on there, but it's a tough one when you're on the water like that.
I think it's funny because. Like you said, like break walls, like the amount of boats that I have seen firsthand that have hit a break wall, or maybe it's a picture somebody sends me, when I was just left or whatever, but around our area, it's pretty crazy. But I'm as I get older, I get nicer, right? Maybe producer dude's not gonna say anything.
Maybe,
but,
yeah, maybe you're a little nicer.
Yeah, well, I am. Yeah, but a little less judgmental because you drop your cell phone, you do this. We're all multitasking. It becomes somewhat easy, but like I know a guy who fishes a lot who hit a buoy. Huh? And again, you're doing something else, not paying attention or whatever. It's just like anything else. But how many of these buoy things, or have you ever seen like something like that sink a boat even? Because the boat that I know with one guy, it beat it up bad.
There's been several, and it's not just in rough water. There was some guys from Pennsylvania. They were off of Catawba, and clear day, flat calm, not even a lot of boats out. It's just one of those days, and they were cruising along, and there was one of those green cans, and they crushed it. Did tons. They couldn't drive their boat in. They had to call for a towboat. And
yeah, because when you hit it, the buoy goes down and comes back up, and it's like that's the knockout punch.
Oh yeah. We'd be running the river on the Maumee River, and I'd look at the buoy and turn around and go, look at that. And there's fiberglass all over one of those buoys on the river. Obviously somebody hit it. And then you just go to the marinas and look around because they got to pull that boat out. There's, damage to it, and it's probably going to be at the water level. So
are you giving them a double whammy? You're going to give them a ticket afterwards too?
Yeah, we usually would. Yeah, leaving the scene, stuff like that. So, yeah, it's pretty fun. You know what? You talk about law enforcement and, we're above the law and what, no. I had I'm not going to say what department it was, but they were in a police boat and they were coming out of Put-in Bay. Doesn't mean they were from that area. And they crushed one of the buoys. The operator, another deputy, I turned around and looked, and he said he's like, "Where's that buoy?" Bam! And they had a brand new boat, and it was an expensive boat, and they did $25,000 worth of damage to this boat. Yeah, and I ended up having to cite that officer for that.
I know a guy. I'm not gonna go there, but it's fun coming to make you smile. I know a guy I used to work with that had a few incidents.
Yeah, it happens. It does. It's like you drive for a living, you're going to get in accidents. It's the same on the water.
There you go. So here's my question. You the big ones are obviously that you've dealt with, right? You got alcohol, you got just brain fart, if you will. At what point on Erie? Because I don't think I always say I don't fear it, but I respect it. I've been in some stuff that I didn't purposely go into, but came in, on that's like, or left early because of, you get these little pop-up storms. Most people don't have enough boating experience. Just see people at the marinas trying to dock, let alone if they were in inclement weather, or, they call it the Three Sisters for people listening to this. It's like you see one wave and you're kind of like, it opens your eyes like, holy shit, that was a big wave. And then the next one, you're like, oh God. But it's actually the third one that puts you in deep duty because you've got yourself where you can't recover, or the boat is in a position where there is, even I couldn't, get myself out of that perhaps.
Yeah.
So what percentage do you think is, whether it's big waves, inclement weather, whatever you want to call it, or experience level is the bulk of this?
Oh, at the bottom of my reports, I had to put the 3 major causes of the accident. Not there wasn't always 3, but the majority of the time there was. And a lot of times, operator inexperience was usually one of those in those 3, because it's either situational inexperience or just totally, they might be a great boater down, on an inland lake or something like that. But when you get on Lake Erie, it's a whole different breed. Even any of the Great Lakes are pretty bad, but especially the western basin of Lake Erie is so shallow. The waves are so close. It gets really bad. I'm sure the salesman wasn't happy. We were working at Bass Pro Shops, and these 3 guys came up and they were trying to buy a boat. And they were talking about taking it out on Lake Erie. And I'm looking at this. It's one of those little, it's not even a bass boat, one of those little aluminum boats. And, I pointed out, I'm like, hey, guys, are the 3 of you guys going to fish together? And they're like, yeah. And I took them over to the capacity plate and said, well, right here, it says 3 people, 450 pounds. Well, I think 2 of them were 500 and some pounds. So I said, you guys.
Judgmental, but I like it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They ended up buying the next one up. But the salesman wasn't happy. Well, I don't even think they could. I think they couldn't afford the next one up. That's why they were taking that one. But, and then the boat situation, whether the boats are old and shouldn't be out there or they're the wrong boat. So I'm going to talk about your Lund style boats that have the shallow back on them, the back end. It doesn't have the back where the waves can roll back into it. And we get that a lot, where waves will just roll up the backside and swamp the boat and sink it. And that boat was not made for Lake Erie. It was made for an inland water, but then people were like, hey, let's go up to Lake Erie. They're catching a walleye. So they cruise up here. And then, like you said, you get caught out in the storms. Either they don't look at the weather, because that's one of the questions we'd ask is, did you look at the weather before you came out? And people would be like, no, not at all. And it's like, well, next time you might want to think about that, because that can be huge.
Here, I have a story a little bit I just thought about that we're both involved in. So I'm at the gas station one day, and Country Steve, who producer dude will, it's like his stepbrother basically, right? So he's fished with us forever. And these guys are staring at me, like staring. And Country Steve was like, I think you got some fans there or something. And I'm like, oh God, these guys are going to follow us type of thing. And any rate, we come out of the deal, and sure enough, these guys just absolutely beeline on me. And it was a north winds. It was pretty rough. I'd say 3 to 5s, to be honest with you. It was one of those. It was just one of those. You go, Nah. And the crew I had, we were like comfortable, whatever. I guess reserve judgment or whatever, irrelevant to the story. But I went out and I set up, and I was coming downwind, and I told you guys we're going to make one pass down here, and we're going to catch them and go home, type of thing. So judge me if you will, but. Those boats, the 2 boats, they set up on each side of me. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And I told the guy, I said, we're catching. We are catching. Well, these guys, we're pulling spinners slow, and these guys are either they can't control their boats as where I'm going to, or in fact, they were pulling crankbaits or whatever. They are flying by me in minutes. You know what I mean? They're passing because they had set up just behind me, literally like I could throw a baseball damn near and hit him. And I told the guy sitting in the front seat of my boat, who was already becoming a little under the weather, shall we say. And I said, hey, watch that boat. He's going to come across me. He's like, what do you mean? It's just boaters. When he sees we got 3 fish on a net swinging, he's got to think, we're going to cut right in front of him. That's what we need to do. They always do it. Stupidest thing ever, and also kind of an asshole move. But nevertheless, I said, hey, where's that guy at? And he's like, I don't know. And I remember coming up on a wave and just seeing just the trolling motor. The boat, had completely collapsed or gone under, just nothing there. And I remember calling you first thing and saying, hey, and giving you your coordinates. And you were like, it was your day off and you were at Kroger's or something. Do you remember this?
I do.
And then we called the Coast Guard as well. And I think you helped, get things going, but maybe tell us the behind the scenes story in that, because those guys were, the boats were, I would say, not up to the caliber of part of it from me seeing my end of it. But then the other thing was these guys were inexperienced. They're also just being assholes with cutting in front of me in 3 to 5s and trying to trough. And they took a wave, I didn't say watch it, but what happens. But then the one guy went back out, like his buddy's getting hauled in. I was like, are you stupid? But I like to hear the behind the scenes on that, as you did some of that investigation.
Well, it goes back to what I was saying right before we talked about that. It just, the boats aren't made for Lake Erie, or they're not big enough. And in the situation, like you said, it was 3 to 5s. Those boats should have never been out there with you. I mean, you're experienced enough that you know how to run those waves and you can get out there or get yourself out of trouble, where they were not. They didn't understand the trough and the running the troughs and stuff. And, that was, so they come in, the towboat guy goes out, gets them, everybody gets pulled out of the water. They go in, we talk to them, we get on and actually I remember the one guy said he's going back out. And I'm like, what do you mean he's going back out? Didn't you get enough out of that? And
his buddy was, going to the hospital because there's 2 dudes in the water. It was like the end of April, I think.
Yeah. Hypothermia sets in real fast on these guys. And, you start dealing with them and I've been in ambulances with guys that are just bawling their eyes out because they saw that, they almost died on that stuff. And that happens so fast. You have all these situations that lead up, and there should be something that says there should be signs as you're approaching and you get into a bad situation, little signs that start to get bigger. While we were out there, it was out in front of Cooley Canal. It was another fatal. These guys went out, they show up, they'd been fishing for like 2 or 3 days. The ramps were packed, nowhere to park. They pull up, nobody there. They're like, sweet, we got the ramp to ourselves. That should have been a sign, right there. And they jump in the boat, they put it in, they start going out, they get out to the mouth and of Cooley Canal there. And all of a sudden, huge waves. So they're still going to go out. Well, there's 4 people on the boat, and they get out a little ways, and the operator realizes now he's in over his head. He goes to the guy sitting beside him. There was a lot of things that happened at once, but the guy sitting beside him says, hey, get life jackets for everybody. There was one guy with a life jacket on, which was this guy's brother, and he was on oxygen. And so the guy went to the back of the boat. Well, the guy's brother didn't want to be in the back of the boat because the waves were just huge. He went up next to the guy, and at the same time, the operator grabbed the radio, because he did have a radio, which most people don't. And he said, Mayday. And right when he said Mayday, a wave hit him. At the same time, that other guy, his brother, who was a big guy, went up to the other side, and the wave hit him and just rolled him right over. The brother died. He drowned right away. And then there was the towboat guy heard the Mayday call, so he come out and tried to found him right away, pulled 2 guys out, a good Samaritan, pulled another guy out. They ended up pulling the body out in and taking it in. But that was a situation there where, you had a couple signs leading up to it. When you got to the mouth and you looked up and there was huge rollers rolling into the channel, why would you keep going? Why wouldn't you, turn around? You already have the sign. Well, there's nobody else there. That should be another sign that says, hey, everybody's smart.
So here's a little bit of a legality question. I know this is technically a Coast Guard question, I think, but I know you probably have the answer. So if a boat is, I think it's 20 feet to something, or there's some deal, it's supposed to sink parallel, meaning not vertically up and down.
Right.
You're supposed to have that manufacturer is supposed to put enough flotation in it, so that you don't have what we've talked about in several of these incidents, like the one I said that I witnessed firsthand 100 yards from me, and then the 4 person fatality. What's going on there? Like, I mean, are the boat manufacturers getting sued by this, or what is the?
No, they don't really. Some attorneys try and go in and find negligence. Usually, it doesn't work. I've had to testify at some of that stuff, and you just go in, they ask you questions about, most of my questions are, how many accidents have you had? And they already know the answer to it. How many with this specific boat? So they're trying to pin it on one boat to try and say it's an unsafe boat, to try and get money out of the manufacturer for the person that died. It usually doesn't work.
I mean, because like my boat, again, I'm not trying to give a shameless plug here, but I've been running Rangers for like 20 years, and they're completely filled with foam, as you know. So if you literally fill that thing completely with water right to the gunnels, which I know people that maybe have done that. I tried one time. That boat just will literally be in the water where you just see the outboard sticking out, basically. Right. You've seen some of the bass boats. There's been a lot of pictures of bass boats out here that have been swamped like that. But the point is people still sit in the boat. They have, it's up. It becomes not as much of an obstruction, like those boats that are literally suspended in the water column, quite literally. They have just enough air trapped probably in the lids and what have you, or flotation. I'm just surprised that that's not enforced, because again, like, do you know the specific law on that with the boat manufacturers, with what it has to have, the length or what have you?
I'm not the actual specific law. I'm not sure. It is a Coast Guard law. It's a federal law that the manufacturers have to do certain things to boats. And that's, they take all our accidents, they compile them from all over the country. And then they will change safety standards across the boat industry if they're seeing something that's an issue. And that was a huge one. That helps a lot with that because people stay with the boat. Now you still get the boats that'll roll over, especially in rough water. If they porpoise and swamp and fill the boat, it's called swamping because they're still flat on the water. And then a wave comes along and just rolls them over. You stay with the boat. You should always stay with the boat if something happens. But
so as we're talking about these things, just thinking about my own experience, I kind of have thinking, I feel like you can give me a yes or no answer on this. So you think about pleasure boaters, I think about alcohol, I think about inexperience, and I also think about maybe the boats aren't up to par a little bit, even though that could go either way. And then I think about fishermen. Alcohol, I guess it does play a part, but I would think less. But that's why I'm interested in your opinion. Or maybe you would think fishermen have more experience levels, but they're also probably pushing it and going out in things that they should. That a pleasure boater would be like, "There's no way we're going to the bay today." So, I mean, what is worse, fishermen or pleasure boaters for issues, or that you have had more problems with? However you want to look at that.
They each have their own set of issues. I'll say, your pleasure boaters. That's where you're getting into your inexperience that we're talking a little bit about. They don't know sometimes if they should be going out or when they should call it quits. Where fishermen, they know, but sometimes, like you said, they push the issue. The fish are biting, they're not paying attention. It does, so your fishermen will, especially if you come to say alcohol, most of your fishermen won't drink that much while they're out fishing. Now I'm talking your walleye sport fishermen, your bass sport fishermen, stuff like that. Your charters, obviously the charters go out, the clients will have alcohol, but usually the charter boats aren't an issue. It's your recreational fishermen that go out, they're perch fishing, they're walleye fishing. They'll be sitting around having beers. You come up on them, you start to talk to them, and you realize, man, these guys.
Hey guys,
dude, it's only 10 o'clock. What's going on here? So, but yeah, no, I mean, it's you get more experience when you get into the bass fishermen, but that doesn't always mean that they're smarter. That just means that they sometimes know what to do in a situation. So,
you ever had to intervene in a fight between two boaters? Because I feel like last week I could have answered that for you almost myself. I think people are getting worse. They really are. I honestly, boat to boat out there, there's people that need the fact that they don't feel that they could get a good ass whooping and they pull out their phones and, don't you do anything now? I feel like that's changed why people just feel the need to pop off or act like a jackass.
Well, we've had all sorts of stuff. We had a guy, he had a slingshot and he was fishing off a pier, which they're not supposed to fish that side. And he would shoot rocks and stuff at people. And then one guy stopped and he had a knife on him. And so the sheriff's department had to intervene with us. And then I actually had a charter boat guy pull a gun on a boat. They were both trolling. And I think the non-charter boat person he had two kids with him. And they caught a fish and they were excited and reeling it in, and the kids and all that stuff, they weren't paying attention, which happens. And then the charter boat guy was just going straight, and instead of veering because you could see what was going on, he just pushed the issue. Well, they got all wrapped up in everything, and they went back and forth, jaw jacking a little bit, and next thing the guy went down below and come up with a gun and was kind of half pointing it at him. And then so they called and filed a report, and you want to say you can arrest that guy, but in order to press charges, the guy has to be willing to come back up. And if they're not from this area, that can be an issue for some people, and he wasn't willing to come back up. So, we get people there's always a knife on a fishing boat because, fillet knives and other knives to cut line and shit like that. And we get people that'll, pull the knife up and, run their mouths a little bit. And we get that quite a bit. I get calls on that all the time, or I used to when I was working. And, you just make sure you can't threaten to kill somebody, stuff like that. But usually it's a he said, she said kind of thing. And That's where it usually goes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little biased, but yeah, some of these charter captains, believe it or not, it's just like they set their autopilot and it's like set it and forget it, and they just it's just bad. I mean, it makes us look bad. I would also tell you it's generally big boat guys.
Yeah,
I could name a few of them actually that are kind of just complete assholes, but and everybody knows the same guys. So again, that's why we just need a beat down one time and maybe mentality would change. But again, like in that case, the crazy thing to me is okay, so said charter boat, right or wrong, why not veer just a little bit? So guess what? You don't spend the rest of the day you're untangling your stuff or losing gear. Like ignorance is just like gun aside, like, dude, what the
yeah, get out of the way.
Yeah, that they'll be dead right. Like I said, no, I'm right on. Like, it just kind of tells me what kind of ding dong you got. But especially if it wasn't somebody that you had reoccurring things with, I think me and you could both probably name some of the same people that just it's like again and again and again, and they need a beating is what they need. I think we need to bring back capital punishment or whatever, something. But
especially trolling out there is. Because it's not like you drift and fish, and even drift fishing, some people drift faster than others, and people just refuse to quit drifting. I have the right to here too. It's like, man, okay, whatever. I just get on my trolling motor and just scoot out of the way with, when I'm out in my boat. But, there's other instances. Trolling's the hardest because it's, everybody thinks they're going to, and nobody's going the same direction. It's not like everybody's going clockwise or something along that lines. It's everybody's going in a different direction. So
there's always that one guy. We can be 3 to 5s, and there's always one guy that's got to be troughing through, and everybody's going with him or into him or back and forth. And there's always that one dude, and then he's like, "What?
Right. Like, he doesn't even know it's not necessarily he's doing anything illegal, but he could be doing something that could be a little bit better with everybody else.
Well, I mean, courtesy and sportsmanship goes an awful long way. And I think that's definitely lost. And that kind of like one of the things I wonder about your issues with, let's say the fall, the fall derbies, right? We got a couple of them now. There's arguably more people participating than ever, but numbers wise, again, just because they buy a ticket doesn't mean they're out there doing it or they're not doing it. Like I have a ticket, but I fished, let's say 100 days in the fall, and these guys are fishing 10 or 5 or whatever, or 1 or none. But
right.
Have you seen a spike in things? Because I know there's been some fatalities during that period with people.
Yeah. So we did have quite a few pop up then. And I think one time we had 2 in 1 year, but then usually it's just one more year. I mean, it's just, you're putting people out there later in the year because for a long time, there'd just be a handful of people that would be going out at that time. Because it's always been a good time to fish. It's just now all of a sudden they have a tournament. People think, oh, I can go out and catch a big fish and win some money or win some prizes and stuff. So then they go out and, in the bad situations, and their boat's already kind of not really qualified to go out in that stuff. Or, believe it or not, we have transoms that just fall off people's boats, while they're running, just because that's how junky their boat is. But, you put it now into the fall and that kind of thing happens, or just something happens bad and people aren't experienced. Cold weather, bigger waves usually in the fall, just bad situations happen from that.
And not funny story, but funny story when you just said the transom thing. I can remember a guy coming over and we were launching at this I guess I won't say, it doesn't matter, but kind of an out of the way ramp on purpose. It was in the fall. This is before the fall brawl things. This is a while ago. Me and producer dude were doing the TV show because this guy came over and he's like, "Hey man, I watch your show. Yeah, that's awesome. Give me some tips." And the guy literally ran, and I'm looking over at his boat. And again, this is not a money thing. This is, you know what I mean? Because I know people, they send comments like, "Oh, we don't have a ranger like you." This is not a money thing, to your point, right? Like this is a maintenance or just common sense thing. I'm looking at this guy's boat and he had a roller trailer and he's going to unhook it. I was like, dude, you cannot do that. And you know what happened? He skipped that thing right down. Then he's trying to pull it back out and it's got, 500 gallons of water, whatever that, and I said, dude, you're going to collapse your trailer now, and you're probably not going to be able to even, slide down the ramp or whatever. So, but I can remember going over that guy, and he finally got things kind of situated because he blocked the ramp. Nobody could get in or out. And I could put my hand, it was an aluminum boat. I'll just say that. I could put my hand between what I'm going to call the transom and where the gunnels are meeting. You could see daylight, And I was like, and he's getting ready to launch this boat again. Now he's got the water out. And I said, dude, you cannot launch this boat. You got your wife and your kids here, man. But he was so hell bent on. I'm sure there was a little bit of ego and embarrassment, right? Because it was in front of a bunch of people. But the common sense thing is not strong all the time. Again, it's not necessarily a money thing. I mean, I've got a 20-year-old boat. Me and producer dude just did a video series, rehabbing the whole thing. And it's a little ugly, but it's very secure. We went and redid all the the plumbing and the pumps and made sure that everything was going to function, even though it's not burnt and sparkly and nice like it was one day. But you had to have seen a lot of shit like that.
Oh, all the time. We would do, because when the state of Ohio went to, you had to have a 12-digit HIN on your boat. We would go and inspect these boats. Now we would only be inspecting them for what length is it? Because a lot of people would say, oh, it's 13'9" when it's like 14'1" because they didn't want to have to mess with the title. So we would inspect boats for that and the serial number, making sure it wasn't stolen, because we did find quite a few stolen boats that way. But then we would look at it and they'd be like, so is this seaworthy? And our reaction was, and we were told that we are not to determine if a boat is seaworthy or not. That's not. Because you run into a lot of liability when you start saying, yeah, that's seaworthy, and somebody takes it out and something happens then. So, but yeah, I'd look at some of these boats, like I'd be, I'd say, I can't say anything, but I'd be holding the transom and wiggling it, or like you can push it in because it's so rotten, the wood's so rotten on it. So there's a lot of those boats out there that probably shouldn't be out there. So
kind of along those lines, boat modifications. Have you seen anything? Because I know a guy that built a boat and it looked super cool, but I'm like, man, is there any flotation in this thing? And he went through that whole process or whatever. But it's again like you said, the state isn't going to determine if you're Bob Vila or not. So, right. But what about other boat modifications? Because I see things where people have put on different things that literally cause the boat to sink. I know a guy that had one of his vent caps altered, and it forced water in from the boat spray.
Yeah.
And it literally sunk it.
Well, there's a couple I can think. One is, University of Toledo had a boat. It was a survey boat to go out and like do studies on the water and stuff like that. And they had added a whole bunch of the diamond plated boxes on this boat. I'm talking, I think it was like a 17-foot, like aluminum V-bottom boat. Tiller. It actually had a steering. It might have been a 19-foot. Had a steering wheel on it and everything like that. But they added a whole bunch of the diamond plate boxes on it, which those can be pretty heavy. And actually they added them up front. A couple in the back, but most of them were up.
Lift.
Yeah, and then when they were cruising along, and they actually nosedived off and porpoised under the water and just swamped the boat. So when I went in, I had to point that out to the director of the program and say, hey, look, you're overloaded on this. And I had to point that out. But another one we had was these guys took like a fishing rod holder on their little boat and put it on. It was like it's like a big metal one. It looked like the grill from a Jeep or something like that they made up themselves. That, obviously they put it up kind of high so they could still fish, but it was heavy. And when they went out, they rolled the boat over and capsized. And when, we got it in, you had to point that out, like they were severely overloaded, and, there was some heavy guys on board and stuff like that. And the boat just went down. I think they went to the back. There was like 4 guys. It ended up being a fatality, actually. Some guys went to the back of the boat, like 3 of the guys went back, and they were all large guys. And with that rod holder on the top, big metal rod holder, it just caused it to capsize and swamp. And then it rolled over on top of the operator, and he's the one that ended up drowning. So.
That's, I guess you don't think about, I kind of think about that stuff. That's my business, but I guess an average guy might not think about something like that, like the rod holder deal. But, backing up, when you talked about that jet ski that blew up, did they believe a fumes deal? Because that's what people don't realize. Like, gas is super flammable, but it's the fumes. You don't need to have it poured all over the place.
Yeah, you got to have a percentage of the fume of the gas fume vapor in the air before it will ignite, and then it just takes one little spark. And I think there was a small leak, and then when the girl stopped, dropped her son off, and she went back out, then it exploded. Yeah, it was just a vapor thing. Boat fires can be pretty bad when they're on the water. Usually you just get the one But like Cedar Point, we had a bad one there. I think there was like 27 boats burn up at the Cedar Point Marina.
I remember that. I could see it from the house.
Yeah. I mean, it just kept going from boat to boat to boat. So here's kind of a funny one that the guy going with it. So this guy pulls up he's in West Harbor, and he pulls up to one of the gas docks in there, and he's going to fill up. So he docks it. He's got a little dachshund kind of dog with him, and he's filling up. The dock girl's filling it up, and she's filling it up on the driver's side, how he's parked. Well, then there's 2 tanks on it, so he wants to fill the other side. And he says, well, how about if you go inside, I'll pass it to you, I'll go on the other side, and then you pass it to me, and I'll fill it up out there. And she's like, fine, whatever. So she does that, and then goes back and waiting for him, passes it back through. He goes in, pays for it all, comes back out. He's on the fly bridge to start it, and he turns the key, and it just explodes. Boom. Well, when we watched the film, we went back, you can see he's actually filling gray water tank. Not the fuel tank, but the gray water tank. So boats fully engulfed.
Rod holders, a lot of rod holders get a gas nozzle in them.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know that? I mean, seriously, it happens. Like, guys, I see it all the time on trailer stuff too, where guys take those like Perco flush mounts and they
put gas in it. Yeah. Well, the guy ended up, they untied it, got it pushed off, and it's out there floating. It was going towards a bunch more boats. So this, I think it was a Toledo fireman, went over, threw a rope on it, pulled it into an area where it wouldn't. I think it ended up hitting some guy's dock and damaged a tree, but it didn't damage a bunch of boats or houses or anything. But so the guy was hurt. I mean, he was obviously hurt. So was his dog. So I ended up taking him to the hospital. And then there was a fireman took his dog to the vet. So while we're in the hospital, we go through, okay, they check him out. Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. He goes, yeah, but I'm really hurting. Can I get some painkillers? And the nurse looks at me and like, man, I just kind of shrugged my shoulder like, yeah, whatever. So she's like, no. And he goes, well, what about this? And it was an old injury on his hand, like a scratch or something. And she's like, no. So we're driving home, and the fireman calls me and says, hey, I got this guy's dog. And I said, all right, they got your dog. And I go, here, talk to the guy. So I give him the phone. He's going to meet us at this place. And the guy's like, so did they give my dog any painkillers? And I'm like, man, this dude's all strung out on painkillers. So I get there and I head the guy off.
I need painkillers for my dog, but give them to me.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I told the guy, I said, do not give those painkillers to him. Well, the guy didn't have any insurance on the boat. So now it's the question of how are you going to get this boat out? Because now you got this mess over there. It's full, it's sunk at this guy's dock, did all this damage. And people were calling me going, I had damage to my trees. I'm like, well, the guy don't have insurance. He probably won't get any money out of him. No, okay, fine. Well, then they had to work it out. They finally got it towed out. So then a couple weeks later, the guy went and bought another boat, and he sunk this boat too. And the towboat guy was like, yeah, we're going to have to work on this. But come to find out, the guy got arrested. His mom was on her deathbed. So he took her checkbook and was just writing all sorts of checks, money, spending all this money of hers, buying the boats, buying a car, a truck, some other stuff. And then his mom made a full recovery, and then she had no money. So she ended up having to press charges, and he ended up getting arrested after that. And it was a long drawn out story, but kind of comical
that's like a bad movie right there.
I know it.
But kind of backing up, so a little bit of a lesson with those guys. I mean, long story short, when you fill a boat up with gas, regardless if you do it properly or not, and you have a large bilge area, most of those boats are equipped with blowers to get the fumes out before you start the motor, right? And guys, don't do it. You gotta do it.
Yeah, you should. So you get done. So what happened there? He's done fueling up. So he puts everything aside. He should have walked up and hit the blowers so that they're running. Then he should have walked in, paid for the gas, did whatever. It says you're supposed to run the blowers for 2 minutes because it's sucking fresh air in, pulling the old air out. And he didn't. He didn't run them at all. He just got on board and tried to start it. And I'll chalk that one up to inexperience because he had just bought the boat and he didn't know. Not that that's an excuse by any means, but just didn't know.
Interesting. There's this, I mean, you think about like you literally, anytime you're called in the later half of your career there, it's going to be a situation like there's like, nothing's going to come good out of this, right? Like everything's bad, but I guess that's kind of like a cop a little bit. So I mean, what would somebody, if you're looking back and trying to educate, Joe Public or whatever, because I think right now, like law enforcement in general, even though maybe people don't think of as a watercraft officer as law enforcement, I mean, it is, right? Just because it's not a cop. And I mean, those guys still carry guns and do the whole deal.
Yeah.
I can tell you firsthand, I've had bad experiences with watercraft officers who have been cited because of it, because they were such assholes. But that's a story for another day. But I mean, what can Joe Public do, to make your job easier or a safer thing? Because nobody, even when I say this, people are probably like tuning out. But in all seriousness, like you have to put yourself in their situation, like a cop, like right now. I mean, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. I mean, you know what I mean? People pointing cell phones in cops' faces, like say it again. But yet you have bad police officers too. Like, I mean, or law enforcement, right? And I'm sure you've worked with some bad watercraft officers through the years. I know some good ones. I know some bad ones. But what can a Joe Public kind of do then to make that experience better? I mean, you had to have had people, they're just being assholes, but walk us through something that you would want everybody to know.
Well, the biggest thing is, so obviously in Ohio, every state's a little bit different, but you got to take a mandatory boating education class. And you can go online and take that class. And that's what the majority of people do because it's quick and easy. But you don't learn anything. So a lot of these accidents that we're talking about are preventable. And, we teach it. When I say we, I mean ODNR. The Coast Guard teaches it. The Power Squadron teaches it. When I say Coast Guard Auxiliary. And you go take a class. Our classes were a one-day class. You can do a little more in-depth on classes if you wanted to with the other two people that teach. But you go in there, you learn the stuff that you're supposed to learn when you're out boating. And then it keeps you from, one, getting in trouble, so that it's a life or death, but also doing stuff that's illegal. Because there's stuff that we teach in that class, and then we'll even go to these other classes that like the Coast Guard Auxiliary or Power Squadron teaches, and we'll talk as officers. We will go in and talk to these classes and answer questions for people. And, you go over just the laws part of thing and tell people what you can and can't do. And most people don't understand that stuff. They don't know that you can't do that stuff. And I think the biggest thing is take a safe boating class. And plus, I always tell people, check with your insurance company, because if you have insurance on your boat, which most people do, if you take a class and you submit that to your insurance company, they usually knock 10 or 15% off your boat insurance, which can be substantial sometimes. So, but then you won't be in trouble either.
We always ask this, producer dude will back me on this. This is like the worst question to ever ask, apparently.
Yes, I don't know why you always ask it. Because
it's almost just fun. I just kind of sometimes,
every time.
I kind of want, every time it's the same thing, because I guess, I'm a fishing guy, right? And so we're doing a podcast. I'm not some Joe Rogan. Okay. But producer, we have had like 2 people in like 75 episodes, like get us on this one. Is that an accurate number?
Yeah, it's accurate. And again,
great.
Why?
You're just going to probably edit it out, or maybe not now, because we want to see the crash and burn.
Setting your guest up for failure.
We've been, this is an hour-plus discussion, which it's probably the best discussion I've had with Jason in almost 20 years. But literally, do you know that? Over 20 years.
I know it. Isn't that crazy?
23, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, we met. My first couple years, we met. You were just a buck that had a huge attitude, but you kind of lost it a little bit.
Yeah, whatever, overbearing cop. Anyhow, so I'll tell you what's changed in 20-some years, your hair color.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I'm going to heed producer dude's warning and not ask the question, because it just ends in a dumpster fire. But I also feel like I need to throw a shot in there, because this was so lovely and nice, this whole thing. It went so well. You were so good and informative and amazing stories. Producer dude, would you say some of the better stories we've had?
Good stories.
I would tell people, if you like our podcast, it's amazing. The guys that fish with me all the time, they get in the boat and we talk about things, like maybe a watercraft incident with somebody or something. We talk about these things amongst the guide clients, and they're like, man, what like we talked about it at the podcast. I would tell him, producer, maybe you throw up a link or something there. The Steve Pollock podcast was really good. We talked about some crazy stuff. Me and him, probably one of the scariest days I've had in a boat. It involved fatalities that day, fortunately not with me, but probably one of those moments, as you said, you realize like this is not good. Like even me, I was like, this is not good. So we've had a few of those. I think the Mike Weinhofer, would you agree, producer dude? The Florida Keys guy,
Yeah,
he brought the heat.
Crazy stories.
He brought the heat. You want to talk about girls, showing flopping top? It got worse than that, or better, depending on where you're standing with things. But so yeah, the stories are always good. I think people appreciate those, especially some honesty. And in this case, I think you learn a little bit too. It's not just all laughs. I mean, there's a few of them in there, of course, but I think the only thing I can laugh at is those walleyes behind you, because I never would have mounted those. But I'm just saying, anybody that's, please watch the YouTube version of this. You'll get to see Jason's little, that were nice for him walleyes, I call them. But you're a bass guy. What do you expect?
That's right. Hey, they're 12 and 13 pounders. What do you expect?
Oh my God. I don't know what kind of skill you're using on that, but
I thought that was perch.
Oh, producer dude, bringing the heat.
Cuts me from behind the
dude swinging hard today. Wow. See, like, you're just trying to be a nice guy and come on the podcast.
I know.
There we go. But I sincerely appreciate your time, because we've been talking about this forever, and I think people should enjoy this. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff going on there. And is there anything else that you think we should know, besides the fact that you need some Grecian, or just for men?
I used to color my hair. Then I got married and was like, well, I don't need to color my hair anymore. But no, I hope people enjoyed it. I hope they learned something. It's the biggest thing, like I said earlier, was take a boating class. If that's my safety preach. A long time ago, I started wearing a life jacket, and I got pictures of me holding fish up, and I'll have my life jacket on. I wear an inflatable, obviously, but everywhere I go, I wear a life jacket, just because I guess I got to see the bad stuff that happens and that kind of thing. So.
That would be like a cop, saying wear your seatbelt. Like when you see all those things and bad stuff, you go, hey, maybe we should just take that little extra step. But yeah, and I think the thing too is the last thing that I would add in. I know there's people, especially around Cleveland, because at the Cleveland Boat Show, I've talked with several people. There's like a husband and wife couple in particular that will take you out on their boat, and then they'll go on your boat. Like you go back and forth and learn. And it's not just because again, you know how some of these government things are. People are like, just like when you're in school, you're like, oh my God, but to have some real world knowledge, or just know how to dock your boat. Like if you don't know that, work with somebody, or maybe even to your neighbor, to learn, the right hand rotation of a prop and what that does. And so that simple things like docking that you may do on a perfectly calm day, and you're like, man, I got this. Well, all of a sudden when the current or the wind picks up, you probably don't have it. So a lot of different things in there, not to go education mode fully, but most people probably could suffer from learning a little bit about how they operate their craft.
Oh yeah. I always said that when, I'd be out patrolling and I'd stop somebody and they're like, yeah, we just bought this today. I've never owned a boat before. And it's like, dude, you bought a 35 footer. Sweet. And then I'd do a mini boating class so they wouldn't kill anybody. And then I'd say, you got to take a class, or I'm going to give you a ticket here. So, it's crazy that people do that they just go out and buy that stuff and think that it's all right.
Oof. Well, thanks again, Jason, for giving us your time. That's stories from a watercraft patroller, investigator, everything in the whole deal. We appreciate you tuning in to the Bigwater podcast. Producer dude, we are everywhere, are we not? If they can't find us, Instagram, Facebook, podcast is on YouTube. We're on YouTube, Bigwater Fishing, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Apple. I mean, did I miss one? If you can't find it, we say this every time. Every week I get somebody going, I can't find your podcast. And I'm like, no wonder you can't find fish. You can't even find a podcast. You just Google Bigwater Fishing. Bigwater is one word.
Yes.
Jason, you're going to send this link to your in-laws now too, right?
That's right.
Appreciate you tuning in. Until the next episode, we out.